Leaving this one like that?
السلام عليكم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونتوب إليه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. Respected elders, dear sisters, dear brothers, today marks the very first day of the new Hijri year. The Muslim calendar is a sacred calendar, is a very, very important notion and idea of what it means to us with regard to this cycle of time. The last month of the Muslim calendar, Dhul Hijjah, is a month that is punctuated by two very important ideas. Within the first days, obviously, is the season of Hajj. And as we perform and we finish the Hajj, we effectively execute the building of the fifth and last pillar of Islam. And for the balance of the 20 days remaining, we close the sacred Muslim calendar in order to transition into a new year. What I find to be interesting, intriguing, and a moment of reflection for us is the timing of the Hajj to be put at the end of the sacred year. It almost signals, it suggests the idea that the main notion, the main idea behind Hajj is what I call the redemptive power of Islam. In other words, you run through the entire year, and the ritual that bookends the year to conclude it and close it is a ritual that if you complete it well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resets the scale for you. And that's a very, very powerful idea. The notion that really the fifth pillar, when you put something at the end of a structure or edifice, then you build it, it's meant to be the last brick in the wall that concludes your project. And as such, the Hajj concludes the project of the belief in this religion and the manifestations of the rituals of worship that effectively demonstrate our sense of membership and belonging and the duty that we have towards this religion. So that's the first idea that I wanted to start with. What do we do then with a currency that's called time? Last year's sacred lunar year is gone. This year's sacred lunar year is starting today. What do we do with it? It's a currency. It's an incredibly valuable currency that's called time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an opinion on this, on what we do with that currency. In Surah Ali Imran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, he says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. The gift of time and days is a gift that we present to all people in turns. We give it to people in turns. Why? وَلِيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, that the purpose of the custody of those days in your hands is for Allah to know which ones are the true believers who are going to step up to the value of this security that's called time and honor it in the way it deserves to be honored and in the way it deserves to be taken care of. And how does he do that? وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. So he chooses amongst you those that will bear witness. وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. And Allah doesn't like the ones who transgress, who are entrusted with time and do horrible things with it. Waste it, throw it away, discard it, take it for granted, do not pay heed to it, and all kinds of other things. I love the analogy of the great scholar Malik bin Nabi, who had a comment on this particular verse. He says, time to civilizations is like a river that flows. Some civilizations who are very conscientious about time, they scoop from it very large volumes. Some civilizations that are heedless, they let it pass by and don't take their share. And it's a very, very powerful idea that he shared with us to sensitize us to the importance of sacred time. SubhanAllah, I find it very, very intriguing that the founding community of Muslims had choices on how to mark the start of their sacred calendar. For example, had I been part of it, I would have suggested that an appropriate starting time for counting the Muslim calendar should have been the first revelation of the Quran in Mecca. That's a very legitimate proposal, because it's an unbelievable day to be part of an experience in this world where the Quran is revealed for the first time. So you want to record that into the institutional memory of people so they never forget when did the first verse was ever revealed. That's a pivotal point into the history of religion. There are people who have written books about the axial age on like great ideas that have changed the course of history and mankind. For the Muslims, I don't know of any bigger idea than the day of the first revelation, when the Prophet ﷺ was in the cave and Jibreel comes to him and says, recite, Iqra, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. I wouldn't think of a better occasion than to mark it in the Muslim calendar. The founding community decided that that's not the starting marker that they want to start with. They could have picked up the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ to start counting the Muslim calendar. That would have been an equally legitimate proposal. They did not. They chose the Hijrah, the day of the Hijrah, in order to make that the start of the Muslim calendar. I find this extraordinarily important to reflect on. Why? You'll have to forgive me and give me some liberty here because I'm speculating, so this doesn't come out of a synthesis of scholarly reading of the entire corpus of knowledge in Islam, but as we do sometimes, we reflect on things that are not commonly found in other places. I would postulate that the reason for which they chose that is because they might have been inspired by other things that we don't talk about very often. I find it interesting that Hajar, the founder of the entire community from which Islam comes, and Hijrah, migration, are two words that have the same root and mean the same thing. So I think it's important that they chose that because it makes us sure that we do not forget who we came from and who's really the founder of our community. That's number one to reflect on. Number two, I think it's the idea to remind us that in this life, physically, I don't mean it just metaphorically, physically and metaphorically, we are all travelers, immigrants, and refugees. Because we don't come here to put the roots down and to settle. Islam is always about movement. We are here to not settle for what we have, or what we do, or what we choose. We are here to always be inspired to take where we are and ask the question, if the horizon is there, why am I not at that horizon in order to take the other step? That is Islamic, I would postulate, is the reason for which the Hijrah was chosen as the start of our sacred year. So at the end of every year, we ask the question, it's not about where did I just come from this year? It's about what are the unexplored worlds, challenges, opportunities that I have in front of me that I should muster the courage to go and try my hand at them. Because you're always alive when you are part of Islam. I think the third thing that I will postulate about is this idea that to live as a Muslim is to embrace change and never settle for mediocrity or for status quo. Here is why I think it's extremely important, subhanAllah. The experience of the Meccan community was conceived in a cave. The Prophet ﷺ used to take leave from the hustle and bustle of Mecca, isolate himself in meditation and worship in a cave, and it's there that the idea came out through the revelation experience. And then the Prophet ﷺ came down and literally, I mean, it's just no longer figurative speech, it's literal speech, built an entire city and its temple with its cornerstone as a black stone. Watch this very carefully. The idea of Medina was conceived in a cave. The Prophet ﷺ, during the migration, the stop before he arrived to Medina was in a cave. But there, the revelatory experience was very different from that of Mecca. In Mecca, the revelatory experience to Muhammad was extremely traumatic. Actually, traumatic to a point that he could no longer tell the difference between reality and the world that he lived in. So he had to run to Khadija and say, what have I experienced in that cave? Is it the real thing or am I hallucinating? She had to test him. She said, sit. Look here, do you see me only myself or do you see other things? Do you see only myself or do you see other things? After she ran the protocol on him, she then convinced him that his experience was real. Supernatural, but real for certain. Watch the experience in the cave prior to the founding of Medina. The Prophet ﷺ was with a companion with him in the cave, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The two of them were sitting together, and then Abu Bakr develops an anxiety that is similar to that of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca when he was by himself, and when the Prophet ﷺ didn't know what just happened to him. Abu Bakr was in that state. The future is uncertain. The guys with the guns and the arrows and the javelins and whatnot are behind us. Our chances of survival are zero. What's going to happen next? Now, the Prophet ﷺ says the following thing, as reported by Surah At-Tawbah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إلا تنصروه فقد نصره الله. If your people are not going to stand up to support Muhammad ﷺ, then God has already made him successful. Note the language of the Arabic language in the Quran. It's not that he supported him. Nasarahu means he has guaranteed his path to success already. Allah has done this for him. إذ أخرجه الذين كفروا ثاني اثنين. Those who do not believe in this mission, they kicked him out of his community, and he was one of two, that they scattered them into the desert. إذ هما في الغار. Now they are standing into this position of vulnerability into the cave, to have a vision about the rest of the world. And what does the Prophet ﷺ say? إِذْ يَقُولُ لِصَاحِبِهِ لَا تَحْزَنْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَنَا. You don't have to have anxiety about this. God is with us. His glory has filled this cave. In other words, to Abu Bakr, his eyes see in that cave empty space. His heart is experiencing the uncertainty of the future. But the Prophet ﷺ, though has the same eyes and the same heart, has two different experiences on both. His eyes see the presence of God in the cave, and his heart is full of tranquility. لا تحزن. Do not be anxious. Allah is with us. I feel His glory amongst us. You see, two cave incidents, two visions, two directions for the next steps, two outcomes, both of which are challenging. One is handled one way, the other is handled a different way. You want to know now why the founding community chose the second as the start of the Muslim calendar and not the first? I think it's because of that reason. Because now, in our memory, institutionally, we are not starting from an experience of trauma, we are starting from an experience of hope. Can I just repeat this slowly? So, the founding vision of our spiritual and emotional state is not a byproduct of trauma, it's a byproduct of hope. These are very, very, very different experiences. You read most of the religious myths that came before us. What are they typically about? A big guy who kills a small guy, who gets to write history, and now we have to read about him in history books. And in Islam is a gentle guy who harnesses hope and passes it on to his community to say, here is my gift to you. That's the second idea. The third idea, I believe, that the Muslims who have followed him have actually done a reasonably good job in continuing on that momentum and that drive. What was the sense of responsibility of, say, that man who the Prophet ﷺ asked to feel the tranquility in the cave, whose name is Abu Bakr? When the Prophet ﷺ died and he has inherited the mantle of leadership in the community from him, what ended up being the biggest challenge that he had to go through? The community that Muhammad ﷺ created was breaking up and shattering into pieces. When Abu Bakr went back to that well of hope and saw in him that his mission in life for about 2 years is to bring them back together. But then came Umar radiallahu anhu, one of the instrumental characters of this choice of making the hijrah the beginning of the Islamic calendar. When his time came for his tenure, Umar did something to the Muslim community in his name, and for us today as the beneficiaries to it, that forever we will be grateful for him to think about. Because unlike his predecessor, his job was not to just keep it together. His job is to build a nation, to make all of us members of it. You want to talk about leadership? You want to talk about visionary leadership? When you have time, please go back and read about the contribution of this man and the gifts that he has left to our community. And that momentum is the one that will lead later on towards the end of the revelation, in which the Muslims are going to carry that drive within them. They get gifted the following verse from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a verse that needs to be celebrated every day in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 3. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم. It is today that I have completed for you your religion. وأتممت عليكم نعمتي, and it is verily on this day that I have given you all of my blessings. And what did I do for you as your Lord who has created you? وَرَضِيتُ, I am satisfied. I am satisfied that Islam is your choice as a religion. What an extraordinary thing that the Creator does with the creature that's called the human, to give them that. I would postulate that this momentum is the one that animated Umar radiallahu ta'ala, then animated after him Mahmud of Ghazna, Tariq ibn Ziyad, and you name them. You go through history, because each one of these are remnants of that thing, the vision that has a momentum and carries on from one generation to the other. I'm going to conclude, inshallah, this sermon with the second part now, which is, which choice do we make today? Do we make the choice to go back to this tree and pick from it this fruit of that hope in the cave that was passed down to us from generation one to the other? Or do we want to be amongst the others in the Quran that were described, that when the cycle of time gives them their chance, they don't scoop from it enough because they are too busy doing other things? So let us transition into the conclusion of this khutbah. As you know, there is a poetic style in the Islamic poetry classic that is memorialized by Mohamed in Shakwa wa Jawab al-Shikwa. You will find that Walt Whitman had a poem that was based on exactly the same structure. So he's going to make a complaint, and he's going to answer that complaint, which I would like to take the liberty to share with you. So here is his question that he says, of eyes that vainly crave the light. He's talking about these eyes that are missing enlightenment, the more to come into them. This is Walt Whitman. I'm not talking about Iqbal here. Of the objects mean of the struggle that is ever renewed, of the poor of all, and of the prodding of sordid crowds I see around me. And here's the part that I'm interested in. And of the empty and useless years of rest, when time just flows and we do not take care of it. That's his complaint. So he's not going to answer this particular complaint. He was lamenting, now he's going to give us a prescription. What good amid these, O me, O life, that you are here, that life exists, an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. This is a part where in the movie Dead Poets Society, Robin Williams takes this, brings the kids around him into a sharing experience, and then shares with them, and then he says the following thing, which is now not in the literature, but in the movie, dramatized cinematographically, where he says to them, and what will your verse be? And what will your verse be? So you see, it gets really easy at the end when we understand things. So what do we want to be as Muslims? Do we want to be a footnote that others write about us in the books of history? Or do we want to be authors that help author chapters of history? It's a very simple choice. I will repeat again. It's a very simple choice. What do we want to be? Do we want to be a mere footnote that somebody else writes about us? There once was, and we are studied as an object of history. Or do we want to be authors that help write a new chapter in history? That's a choice that we have to make, that we decide to make. So I'll suggest 3 very simple ideas to be the latter. People who write history. Number 1, in order to take the reins to open a page, a new page in history, and to take a pen and start writing a new page in history, the first thing that we need to have is a mental state to be in that mode of contributing to history. So what is the mental state? I call this our responsibility to pay back the promissory note that the Prophet ﷺ left for us. I'm going to say this very slowly because this is a rather profound and difficult idea to digest. There is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that most of the time is sort of read in a way that I find weird. So I'm going to see if I can restate it in what I think it's meant to do. عن العربة بن سارية أنه قال خرج علينا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ونحن نذكر الفقر. So this is a companion of the Prophet ﷺ. One day they were sitting together, and in the English language you could call it commiserating. They were commiserating about the state of poverty into the community. And then the man said, وَنَتَخَوَّفُهُ, and we were all scaring each other. Oh my God, not enough resources, the community is poor, it's not going well. So all kinds of things where people were commiserating. The Prophet ﷺ comes into that conversation, فقال الفقر تخافون. Is this what you are scared from? This is what scares you? Then he tells them the following thing. وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ, I swear by the one whose life in his hands. لَتَصُبَّنَّ عَلَيْكُمُ الدُّنْيَا صَبًّا. There will come a time where the analogy of modern language is like a dumpster truck pulling in into your front yard and dropping in $1 billion every day. He said, you will come to a time that's like this. And then he goes on to explain many things in the hadith, but then he says, that's not the point. The point is, if you want to really think about the treasure that I left in your hands and the thing that you should be concerned about, لقد تركتكم, I have left you, على مثل البيضاء ليلها ونهارها سواء. I left amongst you an inheritance where it doesn't matter if there is light in the room, it glows by itself in order to keep you prosperous for the rest of your life. And that is your religion. You see, most Muslims, when we read this, we have a tendency to think about it as being an entitlement. I am entitled to be a Muslim. I respectfully disagree. I don't understand it this way. I understand this to be a promissory note from the Prophet ﷺ that says, I entrusted you with something, do your part. That's a slightly different perspective. Do your part with what was given to you. I mean, you look at it in terms of wealth preservation and succession planning, right? What do most people do? They pass it on to others to spend it. No. The gift of the Prophet ﷺ, he passed it on to us in order to grow it so we can pass it on to others. That's an important idea that we are concluding with. The second idea before the last that we are concluding with is that I like the notion that when the Prophet ﷺ, in that moment of the vision of the cave about Medina that brought us the Hijrah and the new calendar and everything that we do now, that when he arrived to Medina, it was not a trip to easy street. His challenges were more daunting than those of Mecca. In fact, all of the catastrophic warring periods that took place in Medina dwarf completely the period that happened in Mecca. But what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He dug deeper. He found something very profound. Let me tell you a little story. I think most of you are likely to remember this. In the Beijing Olympics, there was an athlete who tried to do something extraordinary that no human being has achieved in sports. It was in swimming. His name was Michael Phelps. He got into the pool to swim the 200-meter butterfly. And if you remember how the 200-meter butterfly works, you have to do the pool 4 times. And what was the hallmark of Michael Phelps? He held the world record in the butterfly swim. He dives in the pool. By the time he gets to the first 50 meters, his goggles fail and they start filling up with water. By the time he makes the second 50 meters, which he said later on, his goggles were completely inundated with water. He had a decision to make. It would have been an unbelievably honorable thing to do to come out of the pool and to say, I'm sorry, the equipment failed. What he did, he swam the 2 next legs of the pool blind. He touched the wall, and you can see the pictures, they're all over the place if you want to go back and see them. First thing that he does, he turns to look at the board because that's what the score is, and that's what all swimmers do when they finish the laps, in order to see what the time was. He couldn't see. He was swimming with his eyes completely inundated. And finally he did. They cleared up and he saw. He just broke his world record, blind. Let's now bring it back to the Quran. This is exactly what the Prophet ﷺ did to Abu Bakr when he was with him in the cave, and he said, "La tahzan, inna Allah ma'ana." Because to the world, the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't have a crystal ball to know what people are doing in Medina. He didn't have a crystal ball to know where the people are coming from. But what happened there is that when you have this sense of humility of faith, that you know that there is something, a power that you belong to that will take care of you, nothing can come in your way. So here is my very final word today for this khutbah. You're going to walk out of here and you have a choice to do two things. The first of Muharram today, the first of an Islamic New Year, well, it's just like every other day. I mean, who cares? Just another day in the calendar. Or you can say, you know what? There were a few things that were said in that khutbah today where the khatib talked about some of these things. I think I can make this day a new day in my life to do something very special with it. I would invite you to consider the latter. Why? It's because we need you. This deen needs you. The future needs you. Our children need you. So please hope. And one of these days, inshallah, from just your commitment, something wonderful could come up. And I ask Allah to make your intention come true, inshallah, if you make it. Jazakallah khair. قولوا قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فيفوز المستغفرين. الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ربنا تقبل منا انك انت السميع العليم وتب علينا انك انت التواب الرحيم. ربنا اتنا في الدنيا حسنه وفي الاخره حسنه وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم واخذل من خير دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعل منهم. عباد الله اوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله واقم الصلاه ان الصلاه تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة وقد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
Would you please be so kind and move to your right because there are spots on the right. Move to your right so you can fill up the rows first before you start a new one. You have plenty of room to your right, please. Plenty of room. Keep going on the right. So there's a space in front all the way to your right, please. The right of the masjid. Keep going. You'll find plenty of room there. Allah.